Welcome to Charity Champions, the podcast celebrating people driving real change across the not-for-profit world. I'm your host, Emily Formby from Charity Recruit, and today I'm joined by someone with a truly unique depth of experience, Martin Farrell. Martin's an international facilitator, crisis coach and author of Good Leaders in Turbulent Times, How to Navigate Wild Waters at Work, which became an instant Kindle bestseller when it launched in September 2024. With over 60 years in and around civil society, Martin brings a rare blend of wisdom, energy and heart. He's worked globally and locally, supporting leaders through challenge and change. So whether you're a CEO facing difficult times or someone who simply believes leadership should be rooted in purpose, today's episode is for you. So, Martin, welcome. Nice to meet you.
Blimey, you gave me a bit of a shiver saying all that stuff because it's all true, actually. But it's quite a thing, really, just to hear it from you. And you've interpreted it in your own way. And that's amazing. Thank you. Yeah, here I am.
I did feel like I was about to welcome you on stage at an award ceremony. I'll be honest.
All right. I could have that. That's okay. I don't think I've ever been awarded anything. Anyway, there we are. I got a speeding fine once, but anyway, not that kind of award that we all want, is it? But there we are.
No, probably not. But hopefully we'll see you at an award ceremony one day, and that might actually happen.
Who knows?
So, Martin, you've spent much of your career supporting CEOs through times of significant professional crisis. Take us back to that moment when you first stepped into that kind of work.
Yeah, well, that kind of work was in 1999, and then a few years later when I started supporting chief executives. Before that, I was in charities, well, from approaching, wait for it, 60 years ago. When I was 60, yeah, I mean, it's a bit ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah, I should just be sitting in the sun, really, and, having a cup of tea. But yeah, that's when I was in the church, in a Baptist church, and then we went to old people's homes, blind homes, to sing to them and stuff like that. So that's what I count as my sort of introduction to the sector, doing good stuff. And then at university and so on, doing all of that. So I've been in charities and civil society all my career, because that's kind of what I set out to do when I was a teenager. And hey ho, here I am. So there was a particular critical moment, which was 97, 99, when I was in an organization which, well, how should I say, I wasn't happy. In fact, it was awful. In fact, it was terrible, particularly the last 6 months of it, which in a way has become my fuel for supporting people, because I've kind of been there. I know how awful that is, not sleeping for nights in a row. Well, actually, it was weeks and months in a row. It's just awful. And then we agreed a settlement because they'd been not brilliant employers, and I wanted to go. They wanted me to go, so I did. And then it was a freedom. It was like stepping out of a stuffy room onto a field of mown grass with a cup of coffee into the bargain and fresh baked bread. It was just freedom. God, this is fantastic. And I just loved it. So that was 1999.
Okay.
When I started working independently, and a few years after that, set up Get2thepoint, GET number 2, the point. Otherwise, it's Ghetto the Point. So we don't want that. So Get to the Point. So that's what I help people do. And in 2002, started working with chief executives of charities through Akivo. I'm sure you know, and your listeners will know, the Association of Chief Executives of Voluntary Organizations. And I just felt it was right thing to do. Well, they obviously did as well, because I did that for over 20 years, up until a couple of years ago. And they've now do that internally. And I just felt a continuing fascination with stories, not a kind of weird fascination, but an intrigue, what's going on here? And your question is, what sort of first happened? Well, what first happens when you speak to someone or meet with someone who's in distress? You better give yourself a lot of time and space. Tsunami. Because here is someone listening to them who doesn't have an agenda. It's just to listen and to help. and other people, whether it's their partner or work colleagues or, professional friends or friends, everybody's got some kind of agenda. But as a professional advisor, listener, I didn't have an agenda just to be there for them. And I would say the arrangement is that I'm here to support you until the end of the chapter, as long as it takes. And I mean, well, we don't have to have, an hour this week and an hour next week and I'm just here. The arrangement that I had was, I think it's called a spot purchase. So if I referred someone, we agreed an amount of money, and then that would be as long as it would take. And it would always be months, sometimes years.
Really?
It was 3 years, yeah. So probably commercially, it was a really crap way of setting things up, but it just absolutely worked, because then I had the freedom to be there for that person, and that was what I felt drawn to do. And that absolutely seemed to be what was helpful for them. So it would be an initial conversation and it would be out of 2 hours worth of stuff, there would be one or two things thinking, okay, well, that's the next thing.
It's that sort of download, isn't it, of being able for them to be able to just let loose and tell you exactly what those issues are. But I suppose from your point of view, it's trying to cut through all of that and get to the stuff that's really important.
Well, yes, and I wouldn't call it cut through. That implies I'm kind of incisively, but what I am doing, and other people who do this kind of listening, coaching, crisis work, it's sort of catching the thing when it floats past. You're talking and then there's something, that feels like that's got a different level of energy in it. That feels even more real. There's a lot of, like now, raving arms around, a lot of panic and a lot of this. And then there's something you think, okay, there's something that's central here. So it's that it's a matter of sort of spotting those things, including if I feel sometimes, and I think of a particular time now, years and years ago, I just sort of started finding really tired listening and feeling, what's happening? Then I think, what's happening? I feel really tired. Because they weren't in touch with what the real issue was. There was a lot of that and a lot of defending. And then I notice that it gets tiring. That probably takes me back to my psychotherapy training. I trained as a psychotherapist, and then preferred to get into working with charities rather than doing one-to-one psychotherapy. But the work with individuals, particularly in a way, brought me back to that. So I use a lot of those skills and orientations and so on in the work that I do with individuals. And I still find it fascinating, really, just to know what's really going on. And it's the same in facilitation, because I started work as a facilitator shortly after beginning to work independently, when I would get hired as a consultant to do stuff. And this was in 99. So this was new Labour had just come in. There was a lot of stuff going on. It's a good time to be a consultant, or be working independently, really. And then someone said, can you come and run this conference? And can you come and do this team meeting? Because we're a bit stuck with each other. And then I started realizing, I think I'm a facilitator. People there's a name to this. So then I started saying, I'm a facilitator. And then in 2002 got hired by the UN. May as well start at the deep end if you're learning to swim. So that's what I did. That's what I did. And it was through a former colleague of mine who rang me up and said, Martin, would you mind if I referred you to the UN? So I said, well, right then.
If you must.
Yeah, if you must. So then, later that afternoon, had a conversation with, and that was with UNV, United Nations Volunteers.
Okay. And what was your role there then?
That was as facilitator. They wanted someone external, independent, to run, because this was the International Year of the Volunteer had been 2001, and I'd been involved in volunteering. I'd been on the board of what then became Volunteering England, and they'd made of that happen. They said, we want to have a big sort of international wash up over 3 days, but we don't want to be seen driving it, so we need some independent. And we've got sort of internal facilitators they won't do because they're not independent, so we want someone who is independent. and you've been recommended, and it's in 3 weeks' time. And,
Oh, wow.
So that was the sort of a deep end, actually, because it was all a muddle. I got there and it was all a muddle, and it was happening the next day. They said, oh, yes, it's all prepared, but it wasn't. So I really learned a lot from that about my own capacities to function without sleep. And they seemed to like it. Well, they did like it, and there was very good feedback from them. And then that started going through the UN system, and then a few years later got hired by the Climate Change Secretariat, UNFCCC, the Climate Change Secretariat, which then absolutely took off. I've done, I think, 30 different retreats for them, away days, they call them retreats, ranging from small departments, they called them programs, of a dozen people through to 170, from 1 day to 2 or 3. And that was pretty amazing, actually. And that then took me into a lot of other international work. And the reason I'm mentioning this, following on from your question about coaching and an individual, that meeting a group feels to me in a way a bit like meeting an individual. You're hearing different voices, there's different people telling you stuff, but it's one dynamic. Yeah. It's one body. There's one thing going on. And there's things that are overt and stated, and then there are things that are not stated, but you kind of get a sniff for, you get a feel, oh, hang on, there's something here, including when I feel, or one feels, anybody doing what I'm doing would feel a sense of unease or disquiet, or there's something not right here. And that is an important moment to hold, because it means something. And one has to develop the capacity to be able to hold that discomfort, really, because you're holding their discomfort, whether it's an individual person or it's a group, you're holding their discomfort. And there's something they've not been able to face or deal with or know about. So that needs to be attended to in some way. That's not to say in a group situation that it suddenly comes out into, there's whatever it is, it may not be appropriate to be in the whole group, but it's certainly relevant in the preparation and in the design of a program. So this dynamic continues to fascinate me. And even all these decades later, it still fascinates me. I had a conversation last week, the second of what will be a series, the second or maybe third series on Substack. So just completing the first series, maybe we'll come to that in a moment. But the second or maybe the third one, I'll explain why, maybe the third one in a moment, is for people who have been through really terrible situations at work, may have been subject to NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and whose learning is locked in because they are not, many of them are not allowed to talk about it.
Okay. Well, that's quite hard, isn't it, if you're not allowed to share?
Well, exactly. And sharing is one thing, but learning is altogether another one. I think it's terrible that you can learn from the bad stuff that happens, and for that not to be able to happen, I think is unfortunate, to say the least. So in the book, with leaders in turbulent times, how to navigate wild waters at work. Turbulent times, here we are, turbulent times. Maybe we'll talk about it later, it's up to you, but it's there anyway. The fifth of 5 chapters is from real people. The first 4 chapters are from composite, fictional people that I've made from experience. Yeah. The last 5 are 12 people whom I've written for anonymously. Okay. And these are people I've supported, they've digested, they've integrated their whatever they went through. And I've asked, would you be willing to pass on your learning? Right. Tell me, and I will write it. You remain anonymous. Neither you're not named. There's nothing in there that could be identified as you. I was nervous of re-traumatizing people. Is this something they just want to leave it behind? So we thought a lot about that with colleagues at Akivo, and then we said, well, let's try it and see. Everybody said, yes, please.
Oh, that's amazing.
And why did they say yes, please? They said yes, please, because they want to hand on the learning. If you've been through something bad, it's part of one's healing, part of one's learning, part of one's integration of the bad stuff. I think I do something for somebody else.
Absolutely.
So so they all wanted that. So that's in the book. And there are 12 in there, and I know who they are, but nobody else knows who they are.
They possibly don't.
Well, they do, yeah. Because I wrote, and then, of course, I sent it to them. We amended it, bounced it backwards and forwards a few times. And I thought that was really powerful. So I'm kind of doing the same thing again. And now, and working with someone who's very experienced in the field of, bad things happening at work, both for herself, and now she supports people in that regard. And I've just had the second interview last week. It's powerful stuff. And there's it's powerful for me because it's so intriguing and fascinating. And for that particular person, how they have found that they've navigated. They are navigating, but they've navigated away from the most turbulent, like I'm about to drown kind of situation, to okay, the water's up to here. I'm breathing. I'm still dripping wet, and it's not done. And I found that so impressive about how that person had used their willpower and strength from a terrible situation, or a series of situations, had sort of moved through it. So I'm writing that, and then we'll write others. And I'm actually open to offers. If anybody would like to spend a couple of hours on the phone with me, and then a follow-up conversation, and indeed, nothing goes anywhere until that person agrees every letter. Otherwise, absolutely. We just put it on one side. And no one knows, and so on. So either by implication or anything else. Because I feel that's so important that we're now in these times which are so difficult, that we support each other and we learn from each other, that we know what the boundaries are of what needs to be kept private and confidential and so on, and those things which actually can be shared and we can learn from.
Absolutely. I mean, you've worked with hundreds of leaders in crisis. What are the common patterns that you've seen over your time doing that?
There are many, and that's why I wrote the book, because I thought there are some themes, really. One of them is leaving it too long.
Right. So what do you mean by that?
I mean by there is some kind of something happening that one is noticing, or only half noticing, and then not dealing with it. By facing it. We tend to turn away from difficulties. We tend to not have the courage to face them. When they start screaming at us, then eventually we start facing them and dealing with them. So I think that's the first thing. Maybe seeing things but not really noticing, and if one is noticing, then not really to act upon it. And I said that was my situation as well. There was the position I was in was well, in a way, it was it started screaming at me, but I could have known that before. Looking back, I could have thought I should have just left before. This isn't going to get better. There was particular individuals where it was very difficult, and it wasn't. I just applied for a job in the wrong place and got it. And that was after a redundancy. I'd been made redundant from the British Red Cross. I was at the British Red Cross for 5 years. Thought it would be a job for life. It was all wonderful. I loved it. And I was back. And there was a structure review. This is now going back to the 90s. I thought, great, structure review. I'm on a ladder to something else. And then I realized it was on a bit of a snake, and my post, it was a restructuring, and my post was made redundant. That was at a time when there wasn't a lot of that happening. I mean, now it's pretty commonplace, but it wasn't then. So I came out of that and went into a job that actually wasn't really for me. That was the first thing. Just desperate to have something, and I needed to have something. And so I didn't notice. So that's the first thing, the not noticing and the not acting, thinking it could be all right. And I think of one of the people who've written in the book, which is her learning, because she there was a position where she was in a position to be part of making a choice about a new incoming chair, and everybody said, "Oh well, all right then, okay." And she said, "Yeah, all right then, okay." It got them through the day, but it wasn't a good choice, and then had 2 years of struggle.
Right. Okay.
Because that person did not sort of notice her own gut feeling. The good news is, then 2 years later, having absolutely nearly crashed, I mean, that person, the organization, and so on, then it all changed through that person's efforts, and it sort of took off again. But it was, it was like just about to crash. I mean, so that's another. So there's the noticing. The other thing that I notice is just the willpower, the desire to get it right that people have. And this is perhaps something particularly about the world of civil society and charity. Those of us engaged in that world are driven in an additional way to others. We want to pay our mortgages, look after our kids if we've got kids, and all that, and have shoes to wear and so on. And we have some kind of passion, some kind of desire to put our ego on one side and to see the bigger picture, if you like, an eco perspective, to do something for other people. And we see part of our own fulfillment is through working with other people. And that can be dangerous because it then means we start not, I was going to say abusing ourselves. I really mean, not looking after ourselves because we're so passionate about it. And that can be dangerous, of not knowing when we need to press the pause button and take some time out, even if it's a walk in the park, even if it's talking with friends. Just take some time out because we're so passionate, because we're serving people. It's not just, I want to get as much money as I can at the end of the month, and okay, I want to do it decently and, not murder anybody and, not do anything terrible. But basically, we're all in here in a profit making. That's what the company is about, is profit making. But the purpose of charity and other civil society organizations is to do stuff which is going to develop or contribute to a decent, just, sustainable world in which we can all live better and have a better time. And that inspired me before. It still inspires me now. And that's the dedication in the book, that I hope it serves leaders, and I hope it serves leaders whom I will never know, because I want it to be out there.
Yes.
It's now in the world. It's in the wild. I've got on the website, I've got photographs of the book in the wild. So it's people from Australia through to US and Europe and all over the place, in the wild, taking pictures of it in the wild. So I want it out there. So leaders whom I will never know, who are courageously facing the challenge of our turbulent times to create a decent, just and sustainable society so we can all live well for the foreseeable future. I mean, that sounds pretty good to me. Why don't we have that? We don't have that because there's lots of people who are actively working against that. And unfortunately, a number of those people are in powerful positions. I'll let listeners work out who is on their list of people who are doing that, but people who are not caring for other people, and not caring for the environment which sustains us all, are not caring for the social field, which is the field of relationships that we all work in, whether it's in a work situation, personal situation, or whatever, in the local community. That social field, looking after those relationships so that we can live together well. And there's an active undermining of that, and say, hey ho, what happens? Well, there's disruption, there's chaos, there's degradation, which I say I feel I'm sort of smiling, but it's no laughing matter. But we need to face the reality of it, it seems to me. And what was your question?
We were discussing those common patterns that you've seen. Exactly. And interestingly, you said, generally it's that people leave it too late. What's your advice on that? When do you know what's your advice on seeking that help? Where do you go and what do you do about it?
Yes, it might not even be seeking help. It might just be having the difficult conversation that you haven't had yet.
Okay.
And there are
Okay.
characters in the book. I should say the book it's 9 characters, a story over 7 years. With the chapter 2 is a Wild Wednesday. It's all happening for each of the 9 characters on Wednesday, and it's when they're in their deepest crisis, their deepest doo-doo, and it's all awful. But chapter 1 is a year before, when things were beginning to bubble up.
Okay.
They weren't paying attention,
Right.
essentially. That's why they landed in chapter 2. And then
Yep.
they landed in chapter 3, which is a year later, and then chapter 5, which is 5 years later. 2 of the characters, there was a chair and a new chief executive, first-time chief executive. And there were tensions in the relationship, and neither of them spoke to each other. And then each separately thought, this isn't good. I'm gonna speak. The name is Daniel, and the name is Bob. And Bob was in the gym. These are not real people. They're just composites from my creative imagination. He's in the gym, furious, blah, 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 like this, absolutely furious, and then goes, hang on a minute, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to talk. Meanwhile, happily, in the book, Daniel also thinks, this is not working, because he had half the board shouting at him, saying, you've got to sack this guy. He's well out of order. Because there'd been somebody else there a long while before. This happens a lot when there's been a chief executive for a long time. Somebody else comes in, red flag. It's really difficult to take over from someone who's been there a long time. Yeah, we appointed the wrong guy. You should sack him. So the chair and the chief executive, we're going to speak. And happily, in the book, they both decided that at the same time. It may not be like that. It may only be a chief executive, or may only be the chair says, we're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about it face to face, and we're going to give ourselves the time that we need to talk about things. So your question is, when do you need help? Well, in those situations, they didn't need help. They just decided to do it themselves. You may need help if you're in such a state that you really cannot see clearly, and you need that space and someone who, let me give you an image, and that is the image. The Wild Waters image came from a trip that I did when I was 50 in Southern Africa, where I have a bit of a history, because I traveled there after university many years ago, and we were in wild waters, my family, my wife and 2 son and daughter, and we were in the water, and it was really dangerous. We survived. So I've used that image as wild waters, and there were 8 of us in that group, 4 of us plus 4 others, and then there were 2 people who knew the river. They knew what to do. They kept us safe. They told us, watch out for crocodiles. There are real crocodiles. They will take you. So getting that help is absolutely essential when it's out of your own capacity to be able to deal with it, as in that real physical situation, and to reach out for that help, and to get that help. So when typically the people I've supported have come too late, not too late, just at a point where it's extreme. Imagine on a amplifier, where you've got, I don't know if they still have them now, but anyway, there's like red light flashing when you've got the thing turned up too much. It's okay if it's yellow, it's okay if it's green. When it's red, if it's red too much, things going to blow up. If emotionally you're running on red flashing lights, there's painful stuff happening, and you're creating or accumulating an overdraft. You're accumulating stuff that you're going to have to deal with later. So then that's going to catch up with you. And I've got a story about that, which I could share if it would be helpful.
Go ahead. I'm all for listening to your stories.
Well, a person who was in a difficult situation said, I'm gonna solve this. Hung in there. I was supporting that person throughout.
Yeah.
And it then got to the point where a person said, look, I've had enough. I'm going to leave. And amazingly got another job. Fantastic. Okay. Wonderful. It's my way out. Then I think it was a year, maybe 2 years later, I got a call from them saying, this job is fantastic. The board is brilliant. I love the mission. It's just fantastic. I've just realized I just don't have the energy to deal with what was a relatively minor staffing issue. I'm just exhausted. I never recovered from the stuff before. I went straight from one position to another. And even though it's great, I decided I'm going to leave. And they did, and then had some time of recovery. They done their sums, they realized they could do that, and then went into what I would call a sort of recovery job.
Okay.
Which was it was still in civil society. It was somewhat easier, and they had some recovery time, which, by the way, is exactly what happened to me when I left the difficult organization 25 years ago. I then went to work in a local authority in Newham, and it was part-time, and it was lovely because I was being celebrated for doing stuff I thought, well, it's not that difficult, but they thought it was wonderful. The previous person, it was someone had left, or it was maternity leave or something, and I was there 3 months, and then another 9 months altogether. Yeah, they'd taken a whole week, and you're doing it part-time, and I was being celebrated, and it was kind of so I was doing good stuff, and I was recovering.
And you're building yourself back up there, aren't you?
Exactly, building up the conference. So be celebrated, not tolerated. I was kind of tolerated before, and then I was being celebrated. I seemed to be doing the same stuff. So that was okay. Yeah, so that's what happened to that person as well. That when I think of another chief executive as well, it did exactly the same thing. Went from one painful position, quick, get me into another job, that I don't have to think about it. I don't have to deal with those issues. And I'm just going to sit on them and not look at them. That's not healthy. So you need to be able to process those things and then learn from them. And I think that learning process, well, there's probably more, but let's imagine there's 3 steps. There's one where you're just surviving. Imagine you're in the water and the water over your head. And that's actually happened to us. Got vivid memories now of, I think I'm going to drown. I think this is it. So you just survive. Nothing else matters. You survive. And then you can get to a point of digesting. And this is the chapter 3 in the book, 1 year later. So they're all digesting. They kind of processed it. They kind of worked with it a bit. And it's still with them. They're still caught by it. They're still got their claws into them. Mixing my metaphors here, but still. And then after some more time, you can integrate it. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is you've really been able to take it in, make sense of it, and also shift some of those habits which might have been unhealthy for you or unhelpful for you. Shifting habits it's difficult. We all know that. There's simple ones or deep-seated, emotional ones. They're difficult. So it takes some time.
And do you think that tends to happen within one organisation, or are you saying that would happen over a period of your career with over a few different organisations?
You take it with you. You take your habits with you. So it may be within an organisation. And it may be that you've come through it, and many of the people I've supported, they've stayed, and they've worked through it in the organization. One of the characters in her moment of the Wild Wednesdays was the Wild Wednesdays was her realization was, I'm going to stand up to them. Actually, him, the chair, I'm going to stand up, get up, stand up. So she did this whole thing about standing up, and that then worked. That was what needed to happen. And she found the strength within herself to be able to stand up and to speak the truth to power of the board and the other people of what was going on. So it can be within the organization, because her desire was, yes, I'm not going to be here forever, but I want to leave at a time when I choose. I hear that from people a lot. I don't just want to crash out. I want to know that I've done everything I can and the time is right, and now it's time for me to decide it's time to go. So that's what she managed to do.
Excellent. So, in your experience of dealing with CEOs in these scenarios, what are the general themes across the board or the chair? What are they misunderstanding in these crisis situations?
Whew. That's a big one. What are they misunderstanding? Well, I think what they're misunderstanding is how they get into it in the first place. But if you're in a crisis situation, the number one, I suppose, is to communicate. And that's to communicate, because if you're a leader, you communicate. And I know this from the Red Cross. I wouldn't say it was crisis, but it was certainly very turbulent. It was certainly, big structural change, big organization. And one of the things I recall from that was the gossip machine. So the gossip machine, of course, is very powerful. Talking around the water cooler. I should say there are drawings, 41 drawings in the book, and one of them is someone talking to the water cooler. We need to bring some humor into all of this as well, because it's really tough stuff, but you need to bring some humor in. Yeah, so there's 41 from Stephen Appleby, the absurdist cartoonist. So they're pretty special and wonderful. So communicating what is happening and what you know and what you can say and what you don't know, and being honest about that. I mean, I think people know this. This is, I'm not the first person to think this, but people then don't do it because there's a tendency when times are tough, just for leaders or top people or team leaders or whatever, put the head down and just sort of battle on through.
Yeah.
But how much better to make sure that everybody is with you. This is about as extreme as it gets, but I remember I was doing some work with a commercial organization, a big international organization, because I was working with their charity bit.
Yeah.
Because although I've worked with civil society and charities throughout, a few times I've worked with corporates and worked with their charity arm or their charity organization. That's what was happening then. And it was September the 11th. What I heard afterwards from the company was that they met at 5 o'clock, I think UK time, every day. All the top people just turn up, just be there. And we're just going to check in. Is everybody okay? What's the latest information? And so that was an absolute, clearly the biggest emergency response that you could imagine, just to communicate what little we might know and to share and to also kind of hold hands through the ether, because this was internationally as well as UK. And I remember that as being, in a way, emblematic of what one might do in less dramatic situations. Just tell people, just let people know. So that's a number one. The other, perhaps, is to go for a walk in the park. It's really tough, isn't it, when you're in those situations and you need air, you need fresh air, individually or maybe together, but just take some time. If you can bear it, just sit by the river. If you've got a river. I say that because there is a river and I'm pointing it's over there, which is completely pointless for this podcast because I'm in Kingston upon Thames, folks. The river is over there. Join me on my bench just by the little cafe. Yeah, so that's become one of my places of quiet refuge, really. And I'm not in crisis right now, but I remember walking by the river when I was in crisis, and actually it's like 2 or 3 in the morning, which is really unpleasant.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't sleep, so what do I do? And go and walk by the river. Actually, one of the characters does exactly that. So he's Robin. I kind of had myself in mind when I was telling his bit of the story of the Wild Wednesdays, yeah. And he didn't jump in the river, as indeed I didn't. And he'd left a note for his wife when he left, with the implication of, goodbye. So it's a bit dramatic.
Yeah.
But he came, but the happy thing happened for him, and the happy thing happened for me too. What happened for him is that it was then early in the morning, 5 in the morning or something, and he's sitting by the canal. And this early morning dog walker walks past.
Yeah.
And just says, "You all right, mate?" And he goes, because he wasn't all right.
No.
And then a little while later, the dog walker came back. You okay? You okay? So they had a little chat. And that was what did it for him. That little bit of human contact, that little bit of someone saying, "You all right?" So he went back home, tears up the note, puts it in the recycling, and goes back to bed and didn't jump. Because in those situations, you can feel really rubbish. So that's the crisis time, the middle of the night time. But don't let it get to that. Just take what you need, which of course is difficult. There's children and mortgages and, shopping and all those things, fixing things. But just take some fresh air for yourself, or maybe with somebody else, just to get some fresh air, just to get a bit of distance. Because when you're in those situations, it is like the entire universe is around you. It's not. It's an organization of 10, 100, 1,000, whatever people. It's tiny in relation to the great universe. So just go and touch some of that outside, and also get the help that you need from outside, someone who is experienced in having been there and can provide a sort of holding space for you. And as we said right at the middle of the beginning of this conversation, just to be there with their presence, and then to be able to pick out the one thing that you might do next. Because often in conversations they say, and what's happening next? Oh, I'm meeting with the chair in 3 days' time. Oh, right, okay. Then we need, are you prepared for that? No, I'm not. Right, okay. So that then becomes the next thing. Or I've got something happening in, there's an AGM coming up that, in 2 weeks' time. And so what's the next significant, visible moment in the drama as it unfolds, and really prepare for that. Don't just go into it with fingers crossed. You might go into it with fingers crossed, but not only that, go into it prepared, and you need probably someone outside the dynamic who's got some distance from it and gives you some time to think, which of course is the title of Nancy Klein's books, Time to Think. And I was greatly blessed that I worked with her for 14 years. She was my executive coach, which was
really?
Yeah, which is fantastic. Because if you want to know about listening, then do what Nancy does, or people that she's trained and works with. Because I had sessions with her over 14 years, which was extraordinary, really. And we're still in contact. So that's time to think. So taking that time to think in a space which is held and so on is fantastic. And particularly in crisis times, because you will just run around like a bit crazy, and you might do the right things, you might not. So you need that time to think, even in crisis times.
So just bringing it back slightly, I'm conscious of time, but you made a really good point there about those sort of talking around the water cooler moments. In these times, there's lots of home working, lots of remote working, and often when I'm speaking to CEOs, that's one of the things that they miss the most, is picking up on the dynamics across the team, because you don't get those water cooler moments. Briefly, what advice have you got for a CEO in that position when you can't have those moments because everybody's remote?
Yeah. And that, of course, is when I started writing this book. It took 8 years to write. So that was before we had really, obviously, the pandemic and everything. So I don't claim to be any kind of expert in that. But what I would say, and from my own experience, I know that it's possible to get that same depth of community online.
Do you think that?
I do. And it's because I experienced that. I've initiated, there's 7 groups that I'm part of, some weekly, some monthly, some quarterly, of different sorts. That's probably another conversation about being part of sort of islands or circles of coherence, people where you feel, I've got something with these people. So I have with all of those in different ways. One of them is in person, all the others are online, and I convene some, and the others I'm a participant. So what that is doing is what one of the chief executives in the book advises, one of the real chief executives. In fact, it happens to be the first one in chapter 5, who says, nourish your network, create and nourish your network, so that when you need it, it's there. And yes, you can sure do that online, and you can do that with intention and paying attention as well. So intention, yes, this is good for me, it's good for us. I wish to serve other people by convening this group around whatever common feature there is, each of the things I'm involved in, there is a common theme. We've come together for a reason. There's just about to be an 8th, actually. That's another story, which is really exciting, around a particular interest. That new one will be worldwide, as indeed is one of these, underlining my point about attention, because there are people in that, there are 16 of us, from New Zealand through to the US. So there's a 17-hour time zone. So it makes the doodle very confusing and really difficult. But I just decide to be patient. We do it in 2 halves, because otherwise people get up in the night, which doesn't make sense. So we try to have one meeting, but in 2 parts. People suiting the east and suiting the west of London. And I'm intentionally being very patient with people and inviting, please fill out the doodle. Oh, you didn't last time, you will do it now. Just yesterday, everybody's filled out the doodle. We've got dates for September and October.
Brilliant.
And so am I putting love into it? I'm putting patience into it.
Yeah.
Because it gets bloody annoying and it's just difficult. It does my head in. But with the intention that we have a safe place to talk about our stuff. And this is other facilitators worldwide. A CPF, Certified Professional Facilitator Emeritus. So I was very proud to get that, and I went, it was all very exciting. Yeah, I've arrived. And so there are other people around. I don't know where I've arrived somewhere. So there's others around the world. So I then convened that group. And it's lovely. So it doesn't directly answer your question about, can you do it online? But yet I believe you can, and you need to prepare it a bit beforehand. So just have those places to be together.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? About being accessible and being open to listening and picking up on those cues online, because I think that can be the most tricky part. Those cues that you miss at the water cooler, you can gauge online, but it's about being present and aware, I think.
Yes. And you're right. And I think we as human beings have an amazing capacity to learn new skills. We can learn this. And I was asking, can you do this stuff online? I was asking, myself 4 or 5 years ago and going, not sure. Yeah, we'll have to think about it and have some special skills. Just pay attention.
Yes.
Just pay attention. And the clues, of course, are different, but you just need, in a way, it's a sort of spotlight on the screen, in a way. Just pay more attention than you would if you were in the room, because you don't have all the cues. You have sound and you have 2-dimensional sight, but you can still pick up those cues. But I think one needs to be even more attentive.
Yes.
Even more attentive, and that one can learn that. And I think we're all learning it by default, and some of us probably learn it by intention. Say, yes, I'm absolutely going to do that, and then it does work. Which brings back the conversation I had last week with the person who has been through really terrible times, and basically I listened for the best part of 2 hours, and then tried to pick out had some clarity in question. But I was with her. I mean, it's fascinating, and I've just yesterday started writing the piece to see how I can weave it together in a way which doesn't identify that person, but is also going to be helpful to others, and it's going to be something that they want to pass on. So I think it's possible. That's my working assumption. It's my working assumption.
I think it's perfectly possible. So, Martin, we'll put a link to your books in the episode notes, but tell our listeners, where can they find the book?
Right. Can find it, all sorts of places. The local bookshops, Waterstones, of course, Amazon. I try not to shop at Amazon anyway, because I think, Amazon's big enough already. So basically go to the publisher, which is Practical Inspiration Publishing. That's the link I'll give you. But then people know that they can go everywhere else as well. They can do that. And they may also want to look up Substack, because I'm on Substack. This is the series that I'm just completing. By the time this podcast goes out, we'll have completed.
Excellent.
Live well in turbulent times. And that really comes from my own personal struggle. How on earth can I not just survive, but how can I live well through all the stuff that's going on? So I'm saying, I'm going to share my 7 practices. I've got 7 practices, and I've written a series about that, saying this is sort of working for me. Maybe it works for you. So that's there on Substack.
Fantastic.
And we will put the link as well.
Excellent. Martin, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your energy. And we'll put all, like I say, all the links to the books and Substack in the episode notes. But thank you for listening to Charity
My pleasure.
Champions. And
Yes.
thank you
Charity
for being a part of
We
it.
should all be charity champions. Come on, everybody be charity. Why would we not want to be charity champion? This is our way to save the planet and the world and everything. Bring all the good sides out of us, and say no to those dark seeds of anger and vengeance and hatred. We don't want those.
Absolutely
do the
not.
good stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. And let's not forget, our listeners need to subscribe and share the episode with someone who needs to hear it. So thanks very much.
Definitely. There you go. All right. Thanks a lot, Emily.
Lovely.
Good luck to everyone.